Ladies and gentlemen of BlueHat 2025, trust nothing.
So good morning. My name is Christopher Glyer, and I work in Microsoft Threat Intelligence. I've worked in the team for 5 years. Prior to that, I worked at Mandiant for 10, where I was primarily an incident responder, responding to some of the world's largest breaches. I was recruited to Microsoft and helped build within Mystic the ransomware team. And so we got to take tracking nation states and the capabilities that we had there and adapt those to an entirely new ecosystem, which is the ransomware ecosystem. So we had to start from scratch. We had nothing, prior to coming in from a threat tracking perspective. Just for a show of hands, how many people here do threat intelligence for a living? And then of you, how many do nation state tracking? And then of you, how many actually do ransomware tracking? Anybody? Couple? All right. So we'll give a kind of a brief rundown here of the ransomware ecosystem, but the way it works at Microsoft is whenever we have like a really big incident that is in a ransomware incident, but we think it might be nation state backed, our teams that cover those teams kind of bring in the ransomware team to figure out and deconflict, is this real, is it not? And so I've had the opportunity of figuring out many different state-based attacks where ransomware was deployed kind of as a cover for action. So looking through many of those instances over the years, I kind of developed a set of themes that I noticed between those that I want to walk you through. So first, kind of an overview of the ransomware ecosystem. The media often portray the ransomware ecosystem by the encryptor or the payload. So they may say the Lockbit gang or the Rebel group or something like that. But it's actually much less common for a single group end-to-end to build a piece of ransomware, to deploy it within a victim, to handle the ransom negotiation payments. And so as the system has gotten larger, it's industrialized. That means you've got specialization. You've had the info stealer ecosystem, for example, that you, where they get credentials and passwords and other things. So that's one level of specialization you've had. You've had initial access brokers created where all they do is just work on breaking into environments. It could be password sprays. It could be brute force attacks that, let's say, exposed RDP. And they may create relationships with the affiliates or the hands-on keyboard operators. And those could be permanent business relationships between two entities, or they could be kind of transient relationships where you may gain access to an environment and then advertisers sell that access to somebody else. Then you had ransomware as a service ecosystems. And so they further scaled the environment where a group of individuals would then build an encryptor, a leak site, and then recruit affiliates that would then actually do all the work. And so when you look at the payment model, it actually bears out that the affiliate, the one who's actually deploying the ransomware, they make the bulk of the money. They may get anywhere from a 70%, or if they do maybe lots of business or lots of volume, they may get 90% of the payment from a ransom perspective. These affiliates will often migrate from ecosystem to ecosystem as they come up and down. Law enforcement has had a lot of success in the last couple of years, taking down Hive and BlueHat and a bunch of other large ecosystems in Lockbit. And so with that, the affiliates need to be able to have in place the ability to go to a new ecosystem. So one of the earliest ones we've tracked, Storm 216, for example. Since 2020, they've participated in over 10-ish ecosystems, Conti, Hive, Black Basta, and most recently they're deploying Cactus ransomware. And then in terms of location, while the vast majority of the cyber criminals are based in Russia, there's a fairly decent percentage that are based in Ukraine, as well as in other countries in Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. Anybody not working? Sure. Nope, still not working. There we go. OK. So with these threat groups, what we've had to do is we've had to create clusters of activity. And what's a little bit unique to the ecosystem is we had to figure out what the relationship is between these groups. So we came up with a set of primitives. And we came up with these 5 years ago, and they've kind of held to date. So the basic primitives we've come up with are that a threat actor could say, develop a piece of malware, or they could deploy a piece of code. They may manage an ecosystem or provide access to another entity. And so with this, over time, what we've done is with each threat cluster that we track the relationship they have with other groups and how that changes over time. So it's kind of a layer on top of, like a meta model on top of the ransom ecosystems that we track and we keep up with. So this is kind of a view into that ecosystem. So you see on the left, basically all the different groups that are basically single deployers, where one particular threat cluster deploys a piece of ransomware. So that happens, but it's certainly more the exception versus the rule. In the middle, kind of the spaghetti code you have, these are all the relationships and ecosystems, and you can see that there's actually some fairly large subsets which then interact with large other pieces of the ecosystem. So this is actually probably the bulk of where, when we think of the ransomware ecosystem, it's happening right in the middle. And there's usually, in any one ransom deployment, up to 3 different parties that are involved in that, whether it's an initial access broker, whether it's the affiliate that deploys it, or the ransom payload. So how do we actually differentiate when something is real cybercrime or where a state-backed ransom deployment? So I started thinking about that and thinking of some commonalities. Jason Healy at the Atlantic Council has actually done some really great work thinking about the spectrum of state responsibility. And so you have a list of things. You have all the way at the top, something could be state prohibited. In the middle, you have kind of state encouraged or shaped. Down at the bottom, you have state executed or integrated. And so it's really a spectrum here of how involved the state could be in a particular event. And the majority of ransomware actually would fall probably in the state ignored or state encouraged that we see today. So as I was thinking about it, what are the kind of key things that we see we come back to? So I came up with something called the state responsibility model. The first thing is, what's the structure of the group that's deploying it? So when you're evaluating a particular ransom attack and to see if it's a nation state, we have things on the right are kind of more highly aligned with nation states, and the ones on the left are less aligned. So it could be horizontally integrated, so that could be using an initial access broker, could be using a ransomware as a service ecosystem, could be using InfoSeal or something else in terms of purchasing credentials to gain, or vertically integrated in terms of conducting the intrusion, the full intrusion end-to-end on their own. The second one, the targeting, especially when you look at multiple different, for one particular threat cluster, multiple different intrusions, it's generally going to align with the GDP of the world. So bigger companies, bigger countries are more likely to get ransomware, except China. Very few ransomware is deployed in China globally overall. There's a few cases of it, but it happens really rare. And then in cases that are more state-aligned, it's either going to be in a very geographically focused area or in countries that have lower GDP or smaller countries. Volume of targets is another one. Obviously, alignment with state goals. If the objective, would targeting or conducting a ransomware attack where you just don't provide the decryption key, would that have benefits to a particular state? What effort does the actor take to monetize it? So in many of these attacks, we see they at least claim that they want to have payment, and sometimes they'll even reach out to the organization or pester them, but that doesn't mean that they actually really want to do it. And so did they actually collect money or not, I think is a big indication of whether a state's behind one of these attacks. Victim communication channel was another good predictor. Most of the legitimate ransomware, they actually create their own leak sites. They create their own communication channels. There's a bunch of reasons for this. If you communicate through email, well, that email provider could remove that email, and you lost the ability to communicate with your victim and monetize it. You also control, if there's a leak site, you could maybe do double extortion, so you could pay for a decryptor, or you could actually leak a bunch of their data and get a secondary payment to not leak their data. The encryption method, so if you used, building your own encryptors actually isn't a trivial thing. It takes a bunch of work to make sure that it's not detected by antivirus or EDR products, to make sure that it can't be reversed in terms of release like a decryptor for it. And so it's kind of its own specialized skill set. And so why do that yourself if you can just use the ecosystem to do that for you? And then last is dwell time. So from when you first get access to an environment, in the financial attacks, you almost immediately, once you get privilege access, you're going to deploy it because it's a numbers game. You're trying to move from one victim to the next victim as quickly as you can. It's about how much money you're going to get for how much unit time that you can spend on that. Whereas in a cyber attack that uses ransomware as a cover, you're going for an effect, and that effect you may want to time with certain things. You may want to you may be in an environment for months or even years before you want to actually conduct an action. So now we're going to take this model and apply it to a bunch of different cyber attacks. So we're going to start with Iran. Iran is probably the most. They do this the most, and so I've selected a couple key examples here of threat actors. So Red Sandstorm, we previously tracked as Storm 842. You may be aware of an attack in 2022 where they targeted the government of Albania and actually deployed a piece of ransomware to a number of different government organizations in a coordinated fashion. So what did this look like? They actually used an access broker. It was just another Iranian access broker. So Storm 861 is the group that gained access to the environment and then provided that access to Red Sandstorm. And then Red Sandstorm then deployed the piece of ransomware that then encrypted the entire environment. They actually attacked the same organization twice, or sets of organizations twice. This was when Iran was upset because there's a Kurdish separatist movement that's hosted in Albania called the MEK. And so the Iranian regime was upset with the Albanians for hosting that movement. These ransoms were accompanied by a very sophisticated I/O campaign, trying to change the narratives and shape the viewpoints of the citizens of Albania about hosting the MEK movement. There was really no effort to monetize the intrusion. It was really just trying to kind of bully the population. So when we look at it in the spectrum, they were horizontally integrated. They did use an access broker. Just happened to be an access broker that was also an Iranian group. The targeting was very focused. They just focused on Albania. Now, Red Sandstorm has been responsible for other attacks. For example, BB Wiper is another one I didn't include here because there was not actually a ransom payload. They just had a wiper that just deleted files. Volume of targets were fairly low. The aligned clearly with state goals in terms of trying to change the population's views on the MEK. They didn't even request payment whatsoever. They had an I/O campaign. They used their own custom encryptor, and then the dwell time, they were there for months or even years in some cases, depending on the organization, before they actually deployed the attack. So in this case, the assessment here, the group behind it, this would be a state-integrated attack. So next we're going to move to a subcluster of Mint Sandstorm. We tracked them as Storm 270. They ransomed hundreds of organizations in 2021 and 2022. You can see their wanted poster. The upper right is basically what the ransom note looked like when they tried to monetize those intrusions, and they did monetize their intrusions. And then the bottom right is basically a map of the world color-coded based on the number of victims. Now, For the most part, this would kind of align with what you'd expect in terms of mapping to large countries, GDP, et cetera, with one exception. If you look at their attacks over 2021 to 2022, there's a very large uptick in 22, right around the start of the war where Russia invaded Ukraine. And you see that Russia in light blue is actually the number 2. So in this case, they actually probably pivoted their targeting to more heavily target Russia at the very beginning of that campaign. From a tradecraft perspective, they initially started using a Fortinet CB, and when the proxy shell vulnerabilities came out, they pivoted and they used a proxy shell vulnerability instead. When they'd initially get into an environment, they'd create an account, download FRPC or a proxy, dump LSAS, move laterally within a victim network, and turn off their firewalls. And then, interestingly, this is probably one of the only groups I've ever seen do this. They used a custom encryption key with BitLocker to encrypt the environment. Once you land on an Exchange server, you basically have privileges to the environment, so there's not much privilege escalation you need to do. And then they would just use the built-in capabilities of the operating system to encrypt systems and then instruct payment. And in this case, the payment they instructed was to reach out on Telegram. Telegram, by the way, is a dead giveaway. Anybody who uses Telegram, not a real financial criminal in terms of ransomware. So structure, this would be vertically integrated. They conducted all intrusions end to end. It was seemingly indiscriminate, except for the kind of targeting of Russia. The volume of targets was high. There were hundreds of victims. It kind of aligned with state goals, sort of, but also kind of not. I have some theories as that. They definitely monetized their intrusions. The victim communication channel was through Telegram. And then they used, in this case, custom, they used a BitLocker with their own kind of custom key. And the case here was kind of low dwell time from days to weeks. Now, what I expect is the reason why this is kind of in the middle from a state alignment perspective is that although they may be directly aligned with the state, they may have been actually monetizing some of these intrusions for personal gain as well, or a combination of personal as well as state gain. So this one is probably a little less clear, even though it was conducted by a state-backed group. And this isn't, I think, uncommon. If you look at Iranian groups, the history of enterprise-wide ransomware, if you go back to like 2014, 2015, there's a group called SamSam, and they were actually also Iranian-based. And they were the first group to actually break into a set of organizations and deploy an encryptor enterprise-wide. And those individuals were doing it also for partially, personal benefit or gain, but also had, benefits to the state. We'll move on to Pink Sandstorm. So you may know them for some of their campaigns for Black Shadow here, targeting Israel, as well as more recently the Malik team. So Black Shadow, they actually would deploy ransom payloads and harass victims. And whereas more recently, their campaigns with this kind of Malik team persona or have really just had their own kind of leak site, again, heavily through Telegram. So 2023, you can see one of the local hospitals here with a campaign and follow-on harassment. So this one's much more direct. It aligns almost everything on the right, with the exception of they did request payment, although payments weren't generally made, and their dwell time was low, days to weeks. They did use a custom encryptor, communicated through Telegram, and generally aligned with state goals, including targeting critical infrastructure. So these would be a kind of a state-integrated attack. So now we'll pivot to what Russia looks like when they do this. And Russian examples are a little bit different. I think probably one of the most famous is the NotPetya attacks and Bad Rabbit attacks from 2017. They took a modified version of an existing payload called Petya. Petya would basically encrypt the master boot record. And so they took that payload. They compromised an organization that developed tax software in Ukraine, and then basically did a supply chain attack targeting organizations in Ukraine. And so because the payload landed on a server that was generally had high privileges or user accounts in it, it had a Eternal Blue 0-day baked in or recently patched, as well as Mimikatz baked into it. And so then it kind of auto-spread from as a worm. And so although it was targeted at organizations in Ukraine, it quickly spread globally because of the different combination of components. They had you'll notice here they had, they did request payment, but that wasn't the end goal or motivation. So Seashell Blizzard was behind these attacks, better known as Sandworm in the community. Structure, we have vertically integrated. Their targeting was primarily systems and organizations in Ukraine, although the impacts were much broader than that because of interconnections between businesses. The volume of targets was very high. Alignment with state goals, causing chaos in the West. No real effort at financial gain, although they pretended. They asked for victim communication through email. And then the encryption method was the custom, based off of Petya, the master boot record encryptor. So that was a state-integrated attack. So the next one we're going to move to is another attack from Seashell Blizzard. This is something called Prestige ransomware. So in 2022, this is fairly early on in the Russian war against Ukraine. Mystic discovered a ransomware event, both in Ukraine as well as Poland. Now, this stood out for a number of reasons. At the time, in the several years I've been doing this, we'd never once seen a ransomware attack in Ukraine. So immediately that kind of stands out to you as like, well, why is there a ransomware attack in Ukraine? Like, many of them actually live there, or it's just something we don't see very often. This is the ransom note that was dropped. So we'll go through the functionality of Prestige. So it iterated through a set of file extensions in the Windows and Program Data Microsoft directory. It used a custom library, or a crypto PP C++ library. Sorry, that's hard to say. With a predefined key. Now this one's unique, and I actually have, it's the only time I've ever actually seen this from a ransomware perspective. Most ransomware will just drop a ransom note, and they'll drop the same note in like every single directory that it does it, hoping that the victim will take it and open it up. This one did it a little bit different. What they did was they basically added their own file extension handler so that when they renamed all the files that were encrypted to .enc, it then registered the file handler for the ransom note. So if you opened it up, you then get the ransom note instead. They tried to hinder file system recovery, very common technique. In this case, the malware author still had debug tracking enabled across threads for their development activities. And then if you go back to the email, notice that they actually misspelled ransomware. I don't think that's an accident. I think they may have been something on like the Proton Mail side or something else that may have like either prevented them from using that. So now if you look at the timing of what was going on of this particular event. They'd gained access to the environment months beforehand. And this is early on in the war when this is a war that was supposed to last 3 days. And at this point, it was pretty clear that this was going to go for months, if not years. And so the Russian state needed to start targeting the logistics organizations that were supplying weapons and arms from NATO-aligned countries. So we see a significant increase in precursor intrusion activity. October 5th is when we saw the creation of the Proton Mail account. Now, they compiled all the samples for this at midnight on a Friday. So whoever was doing this, had a deadline they needed to meet, and an operational deadline. And then it was deployed within a 45-minute across 3 different victims in Poland and Ukraine in kind of a simultaneous fashion. So we've got a state-integrated attack, vertically integrated, niche, small industries, very low volume of targets, high alignment with state goals in the war that was going on at the time. No effort at real financial gain, even though they included, an email address to reach out, custom encryption, payload, and a fairly long dwell time. So next we'll move on to Storm 978. So Palo Alto first blogged about them. They had a backdoor called Romcom. And I think 978 is probably one of the more interesting ones because they went to great lengths to actually monetize their intrusions and kind of create the illusion that they were really a financial criminal group. So they were the developer and sole deployer of Romcom, or R. They've been active since 2022. And then they first started kind of their own leak site called the Industrial Spy Market. And then they built a kind of a ransomware payload that then would also use that ecosystem. They later renamed it to something called Underground Ransomware. And then they are a deployer of a very small used ransomware called Trigona. So as we started looking into them, there was a bunch of things that they were doing. They were actually monetizing intrusions. They were deploying ransomware. They were negotiating with victims. But then a pattern started to emerge as we started looking into their activities where you'd see them targeting organizations that just didn't make sense. And so there was a bunch that were inconsistent with financial crime or financial motivations. One of the first ones that we noticed was there's a targeting of a battlefield management system called Delta. And they targeted this particular ecosystem, and there's no financial gain or benefit to doing that. There's clearly only a benefiting the war or a nation state in this case. Storm 978 also likes to create their own websites that have like cracked software, and then they'll use that in like phishing campaigns or something else to get people. So we see malvertising, we see they like KeyPass or PDF filler or other free software like that. They create all these kind of lookalike websites. And in this case, we actually have multiple different Ukrainian language-focused sites that they've created. The goal is pretty clear there in terms of why you would be targeting those entities. There's a bunch of additional targeting that we've documented. We have a government election authority in Latin America in 2023. We have multiple different campaigns targeting Ukraine. There was an Eastern European airport that they had a credential stuffing attack that they were targeting. We have in the middle, we have a campaign that was targeting military organizations likely in Bulgaria. And then on the right, they targeted a summit called the Women Political Leaders Summit, and this would be all the attendees of the summit that you'd expect. At none of these organizations did we see a ransom deployment or attempt at anything other than espionage. So Storm 978 has actually also developed and weaponized a number of different zero days in their operations as well. One of them was a Microsoft Word CVE. This particular campaign targeted attendees of the Munich Security Conference. So there were, military, government, politicians, NGOs, and telecommunications organizations that were targeted in this particular campaign with this 0 day. In 2023, they also had a Cisco iOS 0 day. As well, and in 2024, they've had a Firefox remote code execution 0 day. In terms of location, the individuals that are part of Storm 978 we would assess are in Moscow, and then multiple of them are physically co-located in Penza, Russia. So this group, probably more than any other, has tried to blend or cover their real motivation behind what they're up to. So they're vertically integrated, but their targeting is broad and worldwide. They have a fairly high volume of targets. Their alignment with state goals, it kind of depends. In the intrusions that they want to monetize, or the ones where they don't. They have a leak site for victim communication. They use a custom encryptor, and their dwell time is generally fairly low. This one falls kind of more in the middle because of the combination of both in terms of the motivation of the state. So now we'll move on to North Korea. So Moonstone Sleet, they started with Trojanized games. They then moved into kind of custom ransomware, but this would be, you'd need to ransom a lot of victims at $300 a piece to actually make any meaningful amount of money. And then most recently, about in the last month, we've seen that Moonstone Sleet has become an affiliate of Keelan Ransomware. Now this one really doesn't fit the bill for a state-backed cyber attack. And the reason is that the goals of the regime are if you look at so many of the different North Korean threat actors, whether it's North Korean IT workers, whether it's heist targeting Bitcoin exchanges and Bank of Bangladesh and other organizations like that, monetization is the point, and that is a direct benefit of the state. And so everything else is, they would look like a financial criminal, with the exception of the goal or benefit in this case, which is to support the state monetarily. All right, so I want to take this model and apply it to a new case that's emerging right now. So about 6 weeks ago, we observed a new leak site for something called Crazy Hunter. There were 10, to date there are 10 victims posted to the leak site, including, all the victims are in Taiwan. Some of them are critical infrastructure victims, including hospitals. Now this one's interesting in that the ransom payload that this group uses, it's available on GitHub. It's called Prince Ransomware. It's a rebrand of it. But it's very uncommon for us to see publicly available ransomware, or the ones that exist are usually like leaked builders from real ecosystems. Let's say the leaked Conti builder, or there's another one from the Lockbit ecosystem. Lockbit Black was also leaked, and we see those reused. But in this case, it's kind of a open source one that's available on GitHub, and then with kind of a note saying like, hey, if you want one that's not detectable, reach out to us privately. And so presumably it's a financial criminal that's like advertising on GitHub. So they gain access through some unknown means. We're not exactly sure. We're still working on it, but probably drop web shells on initial systems and start to move laterally. They like to deploy Cobalt Strike, and they use MS dev tunnels for command and control using Cobalt Strike. They move laterally with WMI. They tamper with antivirus using vulnerable drivers, and then eventually deploy crazyhunter.exe, which is their ransom payload. So let's take the model and run it against this and see how it works out. So it would be vertically integrated, all in Taiwan, fairly low volume of targets, high alignment of state goals with China and Taiwan. There is so far that we're aware of, no financial monetization that's occurred, although they have reached out and harassed victims repeatedly in terms of trying to get payment. The encryption is kind of custom in this case, like I mentioned, with the rebranded Prince payload, and the dwell time is generally days to weeks. So from an attribution perspective, there are no current links between the actor behind Crazy Ransomware Crazy Hunter ransomware, and any threat actor tracked by Mystic. We're working actively on it right now to see if we can find or make a connection. We haven't to date, and so because of that, we created a new threat cluster, Storm 2378, to track the actor. We would assess that Storm 2378 does operate out of mainland China, and if you look at the state responsibility model, the level of Chinese state involvement, it's really unknown, but it aligns with 7 of the 8 characteristics that we've seen. And then if you look at the ransom note, I think it says it all, attack-CW1337 at proton.me. So a couple closing thoughts here. The ransomware ecosystem is really messy. It's complicated, it's dynamic, it's changing a lot. It's hard to keep up with. But there are many reasons that nation states would use ransomware as a cover for action. Right? You may want some plausible deniability for some effect or some outcome that you want to have, but not necessarily have the immediate blowback that you're responsible for it. North Korea, for example, they may be interested in using it because of things like OFAC sanctions that organizations can't pay. And so if they created their own custom one, and then it became known that they were involved in that custom ransom payload, organizations may stop paying. And so by participating in a ransomware as a service ecosystem, that benefits them. Ransomware also gets less attention from the research community. And so this could help them go undetected for longer or not get the same kind of focus or attention. And so we're going to continue to see nation states that use ransomware as a cover for their operations. And as cybersecurity analysts and researchers, it requires close and consistent tracking both of real ransomware and nation states to kind of deconflict when it occurs.